So a few months ago, we made a video talking about the best presidents in US history, and the video did reasonably well. So, today we'll be going over those presidents who could be considered the worst of the worst. From horrible policies, to economic turmoil, to decisions that still leave a black eye on America's reputation, these guys are certainly at the bottom of any presidential ranking. Also, any presidents from 2010 onward will not be included here. With all that said, welcome to Lace 'em Up Media, and here are the 10 worst presidents in US history. Number 10. Jimmy Carter. In the aftermath of Watergate, Nixon's resignation and Gerald Ford's sagging poll numbers, the Democrats were poised to regain the White House come the 1976 election. By the end of it, no one expected the party's nominee and eventual winner to be a peanut farmer turned governor of Georgia named Jimmy Carter. As America's 39th president, Carter has to deal with low economic growth, an energy crisis and a continuing bout of stagflation, while also failing to pass much legislation due to poor relations with Congress. Combined with scandals involving his brother Billy, a grain embargo and his decision to boycott the 1980 Olympics, made many feel a lack of confidence in his leadership. But by far his biggest issue as president would have to be the Iran hostage crisis, where 52 Americans were kidnapped from the U.S. Embassy in exchange for the Shah of Iran, who fled to the U.S. to get cancer treatment. What followed was tense negotiations between the U.S. and Iran as well as a failed rescue attempt called Operation Eagle Claw. Unsurprisingly, Carter's inability to deal with these problems allowed Ronald Reagan to win the next presidential election in a landslide. Although he helped to broker a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, created the Departments of Energy and Education as well as temporarily eased tensions with the Soviet Union when it came to nuclear weapons, his presidency is generally held in low regard. Number 9. Warren G. Harding. As the 1920s begin to take shape, Americans are more than happy to leave behind the transformative years of the Progressive Era, in exchange for prosperity and neutrality. For the Republicans, the man to usher in that prosperity was Warren G. Harding, a little-known senator and newspaperman from Ohio. Backed by a well-organized campaign team and large swaths of cash, Harding easily won the 1920 presidential election. Harding spent most of his time golfing, drinking illegal alcohol and playing poker with his friends, many of whom would be a part of his cabinet. In fact, it's reported that during one of these poker games, Harding gambled priceless pieces of White House china. When he actually tried to fulfill his duties as commander-in-chief, Harding signed bills that limited immigration, supported a laissez-faire style of economics, and then there was the corruption. From cabinet members fleecing oil reserves to private companies, to accepting bribes for special favors to even stealing medical supplies whilst defrauding the government. While it's unclear if Harding himself was involved or knew about the scandals that soon plagued his administration, his credibility was tarnished even after his fatal heart attack in 1923. As Harding himself once said, "I am not fit for this office and should never have been here. Who are we to argue with the president?" Number 8. Benjamin Harrison. As the grandson of former President William Henry Harrison, and a former soldier for the Union Army during the Civil War, Harrison believed he was destined for greatness right up until he secured the highest office in the land. With promises to enforce protective tariffs and support Union pensions for military veterans, Harrison soon discovered his moment of greatness would be an absolute nightmare. During the Harrison administration, a large amount of federal spending occurred and coupled with the passing of the McKinley Tariff and the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, left the economy in rough shape and setting the stage for what would be the Panic of 1893. Also under Harrison's presidency, around 150 to 200 Native Americans were killed in December of 1890, in what is known as the Wounded Knee Massacre. Of those Native Americans who weren't executed by U.S. soldiers, they were forced into assimilation, thus giving up their culture and forced to accept white society. And his support of annexing Hawaii following a coup was just as bad as you can imagine. It's no wonder he became the first Republican president to lose re-election. Number 7. Herbert Hoover. Speaking of Republican presidents who only served a single term, step right up Herbert Hoover, who upon winning the election of 1928, seemed determined to continue the free market, deregulating policies of his predecessors. That all changed when the stock market crashed in October of 1929, and eventually led to a horrendous period known as the Great Depression. Hoover's attempts to fix the issue like the Hawley-Smoot tariff, rising taxes and ineffective work programs ended up making the problem worse. On top of this, his scapegoating of Mexicans and later deportation of over 1 million U.S.-born Latinos, plus his efforts in dealing with the bonus army were another low point during his presidency. Number 6. Woodrow Wilson. At one point, Wilson was rated quite highly by historians thanks to his progressive policies, support for the 19th Amendment which granted women the right to vote, and of course leading the U.S. to victory during World War I. As impressive as these and some of his other accomplishments were, Wilson also has his fair share of infamy, especially when it comes to African Americans. Upon entering the White House, Wilson would institutionalize racism back into the federal government, with many African Americans losing their jobs and allowing places to discriminate without repercussions. Wilson would double down on his racist beliefs by not only screening the infamous 1915 film Birth of a Nation, but when confronted by black activists to change course, the president responded by saying, "Segregation is not humiliating, but a benefit, and ought to be regarded as such by you gentlemen." But it wasn't just African Americans Wilson didn't care for. He ignored women's rights when it came to voting in the early stages of his presidency. He also allowed numerous interventions in Latin America, while also sending troops to Mexico to hunt for Pancho Villa during the Mexican Revolution. After promising to keep Americans out of the First World War during the 1916 election, Wilson soon got the U.S. involved in the conflict, which later sparked the president's decision to sign the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which destroyed all civil liberties Americans take for granted. Combined with his refusal to compromise over America's involvement in the League of Nations, and helping to lead the U.S. into the first Red Scare, then it's easy to see why Wilson has become so hated in recent years. Number 5. Franklin Pierce. The 1850s was one of the most turbulent times in U.S. history prior to the Civil War, as the issue of slavery and its expansion into the Western territories soon dominated political discussions. In 1852, the Democrats nominated Franklin Pierce, a New Hampshire native and former senator who appeared to be a unifying candidate at a time of division within the party. After winning the election of 1852, Pierce's personal life was soon hampered following the death of his son during a train accident, which plunged Pierce and his wife into depression. Once in office, though, things got even worse as Pierce signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which allowed the people of Kansas and Nebraska to settle the slavery issue for themselves. This paved the way for Bleeding Kansas, which saw pro- and anti-slavery forces in the area battle each other, resulting in the deaths of 50 or more people. President Pierce also supported a document called the Ostend Manifesto, which proposed the idea of purchasing Cuba from Spain and adding it to the U.S. as a slave state, with threats of going to war with Spain if they refused to sell. As you can imagine, this made many Northern Democrats furious. Meanwhile, the president's attempt at patronage further tarnished his reputation within the party, and as such Pierce failed to win renomination come the next election. While the case can be made that Pierce's personal tragedies and alcoholism played a role in his presidency being a failure, his denunciation of Northerners in his party and his failed policies hurt him even more. Number 4. George W. Bush. To say that Bush Jr.'s time in office started off on the wrong foot might just be an understatement. After the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Bush when it came to Florida's electoral votes in the 2000 election, many viewed his presidency as illegitimate. Things changed following the September 11th attacks in New York City, with Bush's words inspiring the nation at a time of great uncertainty, which saw his polling numbers reach 90%, the highest for any president. This soon began America's war on terror. However, the decision to oust Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein over claims of weapons of mass destruction proved disastrous, as no weapons were found. It also resulted in instability within the area, as the U.S.'s efforts to democratize Iraq were rejected and led to terrorist groups soon taking over. Things weren't better at home as Bush signed the Patriot Act, which expanded the government's power to spy on average Americans and those they view as a threat. His efforts in dealing with the Great Recession through bailouts at taxpayers' expense was viewed negatively, as was his response to Hurricane Katrina. Bush also signed the Authorization for Use of Military Force, or AUMF for short, which basically opened the door for all future presidents to invade foreign countries under the guise of stopping terrorism. By the end of his term, Bush had around a 70% disapproval rating, and many voters were more than happy to see him go. Number 3. Andrew Jackson. Renowned for his victory during the Battle of New Orleans against the British, Jackson was persuaded to run for president in 1824, only for John Quincy Adams to win, even though Jackson had the most electoral and popular votes. Fast forward 4 years and Jackson is fighting for the presidency once more, but under the newly created Democratic Party. After winning the election, Jackson soon begins a habit of vetoing several bills from Congress, including the charter for the Second National Bank of the United States, which needed to be renewed. Speaking of the National Bank, Jackson's handling of what would be the bank war would lead to devastating consequences for the economy upon leaving office. Jackson's signing of the 1830 Indian Removal Act would see thousands of Indian tribes being kicked off their land and forced to move elsewhere. He even defied a Supreme Court decision that said the government couldn't do this. While he may be an inspiring figure to some, others view him as a tyrant who also happens to be a slave owner. Number 2. Andrew Johnson. Following the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in April of 1865, Andrew Johnson soon became the 17th U.S. president. This was at a critical time in America's history as the Civil War had ended and the Reconstruction era began. Instead of going along with amendments that helped the former slaves and punished the South, Johnson tried to bring back all of the Confederate states into the U.S., whilst continuing the same white supremacist policies as before. He also pardoned some if not all the Confederates, and established black codes that restricted many opportunities for African Americans. Along with vetoing bills like the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and his issues with Congress, made Johnson the first president to ever face impeachment. Although he avoided being impeached by just one vote, his credibility, if it even existed, was forever tarnished. Before we get to number 1, here are a few dishonorable mentions. Richard Nixon. His involvement with the Watergate scandal, the war on drugs and secret bombs in Cambodia and Laos are low points of his leadership. John Tyler. A slaveholder who joined the Confederacy and pushed for the annexation of Texas, which helped lead to the Civil War. Millard Fillmore. Despite being against slavery, he signed the Fugitive Slave Act, which furthered racial tensions in the U.S. Grover Cleveland. Breaking up the 1894 Pullman strike, divided his party over the gold standard and ruined many Native American lives with the 1887 Dawes Act. Number 1. James Buchanan. Despite being aware of the issue of slavery during his multiple attempts at the presidency, James Buchanan proceeded to make things worse at a time of great upheaval. In 1857, the Supreme Court announced their ruling in the case, Dred Scott v. Sandford, with a majority of justices declaring that Dred Scott, an African-American slave suing for his freedom, was not only a slave, but also considered property that can be taken to any state, regardless if it was a free or slave state. This decision not only made the Civil War even more of a possibility, but it's even rumored that Buchanan himself convinced a court justice to go along with the majority's ruling. After Abraham Lincoln won the 1860 election, several Southern states began to secede from the Union. Buchanan's inability to stop the secession and the Battle of Fort Sumner, which officially kicked off the Civil War, made him look inept and feeble. After leaving office, Buchanan tried to write a memoir to try and save his legacy, but failed to do so before and after his death. It's for those reasons why we label James Buchanan the worst president in U.S. history. And that's our list. Who do you think was the worst president? Leave your thoughts below. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and hit that notifications bell, so you never miss a video when it drops.